Okay, so we've talked about the overview of cellular respiration. We've talked about the first big chunk, glycolysis, and now we're going to talk about the Krebs cycle. This is the second out of the three big chunks of stuff that happens. So if we look, the Krebs cycle is also known as the citric acid cycle. There's a reason for that. We've talked about the blue and the light pink squares. We're now going to talk about that cycle that's happening in the mitochondria. The final thing we talk about is oxidative phosphorylation. So the Krebs cycle, what we need to remember is that what's going into it right now is acetyl-CoA, which is a different form of the pyruvate that was made from glucose. What's going to happen to that acetyl-CoA is it's going to produce a couple different things. It's going to produce carbon dioxide, so we'll see the gray. It's going to create NADH. It's going to create a little bit of ATP, and it's going to create FADH as well. This occurs in the mitochondrial matrix, which is the fluid in the mitochondria. It releases the remaining carbons from what was glucose, and then became pyruvate, and then became acetyl-CoA. It transfers that energy from breaking those bonds to NADH, NAD, FAD, and ADP, and so then the energy is stored in NADH, FADH, and ATP. If we look at the cycle, we see that acetyl-CoA is the input at the top. And what ends up happening is it is turned into a variety of different forms. You don't have to worry about the names of these, so don't worry too much about what that looks like. The first important step number 3, if we skip over those ones, is that when we change that form, we bond hydrogen to NADH, making NADH, and that's the first chunk of energy that's stored and will go elsewhere. Also makes carbon dioxide. The next step that is also important is it does that again. So we're making 2 NADHs by bonding hydrogen to them. It's also storing energy. The next step is that we take ADP, or the next important step is you take ADP, bond a phosphate to it, and that's some energy storage as well. And so now I've made 2 NADHs and an ATP. I'm also going to store energy in FADH. I take FAD, I bond hydrogens to it, I get FADH, and so there's storage of energy in there as well. I input a little bit of water. I get another NADH, more storage of energy, and the cycle continues. This is a zoomed in version of what you just saw on that cycle. What's important here is that basically we start with citrate, and every time a hydrogen or an oxygen is bound or removed, it becomes something else. So if we look back, we see that this citrate is just either stuff is being pulled off or bound to it. It becomes isocitrate, it becomes something else. The whole cycle, it's the same molecule, but as I add and subtract parts to it, it becomes something else. The parts that it loses end up binding to the NADs, the ADPs, and that's where the storage of energy occurs. This is the zoomed in version. We see that at steps 3 and 4, the first time that we have the storage of energy. 5 and 6, also more storage of energy, and more storage of energy here as well. So what did we get from the Krebs cycle? How was ATP formed? What are the waste products? How do the events occur? Do all cells? See if you can answer these. Bring these up on Wednesday. Answering these questions as a class is going to be probably the best way to go over them. What did we get from Krebs? This kind of answers one of those questions. When we look at it, we end up with 6 NADHs, that is energy storage, 2 FADH2s, also energy storage, and 2 ATPs. The only input that happens here is basically acetyl-CoA and water. The output waste, so NADH, ATP, and FADH would not be considered waste output. The only waste output are going to be carbon dioxide. This is where we get the carbon dioxide from when we exhale. Again, if we look at the steps, right now we've only made 4 ATPs total, and a couple other energy sources as well. But from glycolysis, from the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, we've only made 4 ATP total. So the final step is actually where we make the most ATP. Look for the final, we're going to go over the final one, and that'll be done for Wednesday.